I just want to introduce these guys real quickly. We are the HIV/AIDS Illustrated Memoir team. I'm Max Moleski. I am a PhD student in the Computational Media Arts and Cultures program here at Duke. And for our project, we were working with a rather unique archive collected by one individual through their career in HIV/AIDS research and activism and working for NGOs in the UN globally. And from this, Ashley, Brock, and Christina made a zine directly working from content in the archive. I'm really proud of what they produced. I think it's super awesome and way beyond anything I could ever imagine. And so without further ado, here they are.
Right. So I'm Brock.
My name is Ashley Manico.
I'm Christina.
Thank you. And if we can get that first slide. Factual truths are never compellingly true. The historian knows how vulnerable is the whole texture of facts in which we spend our daily life. Facts need testimony to be remembered and trustworthy domain of human affairs. So our project was centered on the Maria de Bruyn papers over in the Rubenstein Library on West Campus. This archive is a collection of scholarly works as well as posters, pamphlets, and other ephemera, all related to women's rights and global health in the context of HIV and AIDS. Our goal was to distill narrative from this collection, to translate factual truths into testimony. We've incorporated a lot of facts, data points, and things that are or were plain truth. And if we've done a good job, then our readers will find those facts stitched together into stories about people, testimonies to illustrate what has happened, what is still happening, and why we should care. In our first week in the archive, I found a document that intrigued me so much it became the focus of my section of the project. It's called the Handbook for Legislators on HIV/AIDS Law and Human Rights. There's a lot of juicy stuff in there if you're a public policy nerd, but the thing that struck me most was a list of rights excerpted from the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that was applied specifically to people living with HIV and AIDS. That list became the structural backbone of my pages as I centered each set of panels on a particular right that I saw documented in the archive, mostly violations of them, but occasionally cases where people's rights were being protected. So this first page, centered on the right to privacy, gives a good example of the sources that I pulled from to illustrate my point. I used testimonies from court cases and collections by various NGOs to share intensely personal stories, such as the one in the top row there. I also saw certain rights emphatically defended in pamphlet after pamphlet, so I extrapolated that the people writing pamphlets saw violations of those rights, and the panels on the left are a good example of this. Then for the second page, I don't actually have anything specific to point out here. I just picked this page because I thought it turned out really well, and I wanted you all to appreciate it with me. But it shows off nicely the overall effect I'm going for, this sense of a flurry of complex issues all tangled around a central topic. The right is at the center of the page, structural and stable, but what draws your eye is the pictures, the people, these glimpses into struggles you may not have even heard of, but that have affected and continue to affect people all over the world. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ashley.
Thank you. While looking through the archives, I was particularly interested in material that was centered around women's rights and empowerment. This combined with the films that we watched, articles that I came across, and information we received from 2 different interviews, it made me aware that there are still discrepancies that women face through this epidemic and how they are still currently left disadvantaged. And within my pages, I would like to focus on the intersectionality of HIV and particularly how that relates to gender inequality. And for this first page I have up here, this is focusing on biologically how the HIV virus affects female and male bodies differently, and how that is important because with this, that the rate of HIV among young girls and women is more than double that of similarly aged males. However, they are still less represented in research trials, and biologically things like immunity genes in the X chromosome and modulations in hormones can affect different medications, and if they're not being properly tested, you can't effectively treat this group. And to make it more wide-scaled, on a global scale, I'm discussing how, on these 2 pages, how gender inequality and cultural practices can leave women disadvantaged in more severe instances, such as domestic violence and coercive sterilization, and how that shows that if on large scales that they are facing these difficulties, how can they better govern their bodies and protect themselves from infections and things of that sort. And lastly, a 3rd page that I have to show with you guys is how the virus impacts women and their sexuality, and how it affects how they continue in their relationships, and also how they look at their own bodies internally. And now I'm going to pass this off to Christina.
Hi, I just want to take this moment to highlight the breadth and depth of the archive that we got to really research and delve into. We all read through the materials in it, and yet we came with 3 different topics and 3 different graphic styles. I just want to mention that these are only a few of the pages that they've made. They've made 10 to 12 pages. We've all did each. And so when I read through the archive, I really wanted to highlight the thoughts, questions, and concerns of women living with HIV/AIDS, and I particularly emphasized on the intersectionality. So what does it mean to be a woman and having HIV/AIDS? But there's also different interconnected social categorizations, like motherhood or your profession. And how have these mindsets changed over time given the advent of medication and prevention? So what did I make? Well, this is my 1st and 2nd page, and my frame narrative is entitled Some Thoughts at Night. And I wanted to really highlight the stories and the testimonies and the facts that I got to read. And I chose an ambiguous narrator who was literally having some thoughts at night on what it means on being a woman and having HIV/AIDS in the present day, what was forgotten, and a retrospective look and thoughts. As you see on the right-hand side, that's my 2nd page, and I included the title medication, and in the blue boxes are the thoughts that she asked, but it's interspersed with facts. You can see in the white text, such as medication studies in the United States during the 1990s would keep women from participating with phrases such as no pregnant woman and no non-pregnant woman. And things like that to really highlight why women have these thoughts, what were the legislation and the context of the social in the 80s and 90s. So how did I make this? Well, it was a lot of changing directions. I initially tackled my chapter with making a timeline. As you can see there, it was a lot of writing, a lot of text. It was really text heavy, and I thought that I was losing the really personal narratives and the testimonies that I got to see in the archives. So I switched into questions, as you can see, and making it more images to see what they would have been seeing while they were living through it. And so why did I make this? Why? Something really special that we got to do is that while we were researching through the archive, we got to have Maria talk to us, and she also introduced us to Marian and Hannah. Marian, who lives in South Africa, and Hannah from the Netherlands, and we got to interview them through Skype. And Hannah was really wonderful and mentioned something that really stuck with me, and was that a problem that a lot of people living with HIV/AIDS is that self-stigma can be so crippling. And I kept on thinking about it and reflecting on it, and that made me want to turn that back to the reader. How can they reflect? How can they think? So my final page is some questions that keep me up at night, and I ask the reader to not only think about it, but to write, put themselves into the narrative that I've created, and hopefully take away from it. So thank you to my colleagues who have been so collaboratively wonderful. Thank you to Max, our grad mentor. And thank you to Maria for giving us a great archive. And really, I hope that y'all will look into it, because there's some really great gems in there and stories that have been lost. So thank you.